All right, today we are jumping into one of the most incredible events in the entire Bible, Exodus chapter 16. We're going to walk through it verse by verse, building each scene so vividly that by the end, you won't just remember the story, you'll feel like you were there. Let's get into it.
So we're kicking things off with verse 3, and wow, talk about a nation at its breaking point. This is way more than just complaining. It's a raw, desperate cry. I mean, imagine them screaming this, their voices cracking. They're saying they would literally rather be dead slaves with full stomachs than alive and free but starving. The stakes could not be higher.
So how in the world did they get to this point? Well, this first section is all about setting the stage for this massive crisis in what is truly a desert of despair.
Okay, let's build this scene together. Verse 1, you've got the Israelites leaving a beautiful oasis behind them. Now they're stepping into the wilderness of sin. And this place is exactly what it sounds like. Just a huge, empty expanse of sand and rock under a scorching sun. It's been exactly 1 month since they fled Egypt. Now verse 2, the whole mood just collapses. Imagine a low grumble starting way at the back of this massive crowd. It just swells and grows into a wave of angry shouting, and you can see them all pointing, all that anger focused right on two guys, Moses and Aaron.
Now, after a complaint like that against God's chosen leaders, you'd probably expect a pretty harsh punishment, right? But what happens next isn't punishment at all. It's a promise. This whole next part is about that incredible, divine response, a promise straight from heaven. So in verse 4, God speaks directly to Moses. And you have to imagine Moses, all alone, hearing this unbelievable promise. I'm about to rain bread from heaven. Just see that image in his mind's eye, the sky opening up and a gentle shower of food just blanketing the desert floor. But there's a catch. It's a test. Then verse 5 adds this critical rule. On the 6th day, they have to prepare for a day of rest. So picture the people gathering, not one basket, but two. It's a visible act of faith, trusting that God will provide for the coming Sabbath.
Okay, so now Moses and Aaron have to go relay this message. In verse 6, they turn to face that angry mob, and they declare, "This evening, you're going to know it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt." Then, verse 7, they keep going, "And in the morning, you will see the glory of the Lord." Imagine them making this two-part promise. Meet at night, glory in the morning. Then finally, in verse 8, Moses makes it really personal. He tells them, this food is proof that God has heard you. And by the way, your complaints, they weren't really against us, they were against God himself.
And this is a major turning point. Verse 9, Moses tells Aaron, okay, tell the entire congregation, come near before the Lord. Picture Aaron's voice booming across the whole camp. And then, verse 10, the big cinematic moment. Imagine millions of people turning all at once to look out at the empty wilderness. And then they see it. A single cloud starts to pulse with this impossible, brilliant light. It's the glory of the Lord. Verse 11, God's voice comes again, but just to Moses. And in verse 12, he confirms the plan directly. At twilight you'll eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. The promise is now sealed by a divine appearance.
The promise has been made. The glory has been revealed. Now comes the fulfillment. And with it, a very specific and very important set of instructions.
Verse 13. Okay, the sun is setting and the sky gets dark, but it's not nightfall. What you're seeing is a living cloud of birds. We're talking millions of quail, and they descend with this deafening roar of wings. Imagine them landing and just covering everything. The entire camp, as far as you can see, is blanketed in meat. Easy for the taking. The first part of the promise is fulfilled.
Now for the morning. Verse 14, the sun comes up and it starts to burn away the morning dew. And as the moisture vanishes, it reveals something left behind. There's this layer of fine, flaky, almost frost-like particles all over the desert floor. Then in verse 15, the people see it. You can just imagine a little kid pointing, asking their parents the question that's on everybody's mind, man who, which just means, what is it? They are completely baffled. So Moses explains. Verse 16, he lays out the first rule. Gather it, every man according to what he can eat. It's 1 omer, that's about 2 quarts, for each person in your tent. Verse 17 shows them getting to it. You can picture a big, strong guy greedily scooping up a huge sackful, while maybe an elderly woman only manages a small handful. But then verse 18 reveals a miracle inside the miracle. You see the guy pour out his huge sack, and it measures out to be exactly enough for his family, not a crumb left over.
Then you watch the woman pour out her tiny amount, and it expands to become the perfect portion for hers. No one had too much, and no one had too little. It was perfect every time.
These rules were also teaching a huge lesson about trust. So in verse 19, Moses gives a really simple command. Let no one leave any of it till the morning. But, verse 20 shows some people didn't listen. And you can just picture them the next morning, secretly uncovering their stash, only to find this foul, stinking mess, just writhing with worms. It's disgusting. Then verse 21 adds one last detail. Any manna that was left on the ground when the sun got hot just melted away. This was daily bread and only daily bread.
All right, so the daily test of trust has been set. But now comes the biggest test of all, one that's going to establish a brand new rhythm for the entire nation. So we get to verse 22. It's Friday, the 6th day. Imagine everyone going out and gathering twice as much as they normally would. Then, in verse 23, Moses explains exactly why. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Finally, verse 24 shows the second miracle. They keep the food overnight, but this time it stays perfectly fresh. Can you imagine someone lifting the cloth on Saturday morning and finding the manna just as pure and white as the day they gathered it? No worms, no stench. Moses then lays out the law of the Sabbath. Verse 25, eat that today, he says, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Then in verse 26, he makes the pattern crystal clear. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will be none. It's a command to stop striving and to simply trust. But, old habits die hard. Verse 27, on the 7th day, some people still went out to look for it. Picture a wide shot of the camp, totally silent and resting, but way out in the distance, you see a few figures bent over, searching the empty desert floor, and of course, finding nothing. In verse 28, God gives a firm rebuke through Moses, basically saying, how long are you guys going to refuse to keep my commands? Then in verse 29, he reminds them the Sabbath is a gift. He provides double on the 6th day so they can rest. Stay every man in his place, he commands. And finally, the lesson sinks in. Verse 30, so the people rested on the 7th day.
Now, this whole event wasn't just about a stressful week of testing. It was about establishing a legacy of God's provision that would last for decades to come.
Verse 31 finally gives us the details we've been waiting for. The people officially name this stuff manna, from their question, what is it? And we get a description. Picture it in your mind. It's like a tiny white coriander seed. And now imagine the taste. Sweet, like a wafer made with honey.
And to make sure this miracle is never, ever forgotten, verse 32 records God's command. Fill an omer with it to be kept for your generations. So in verse 33, Moses gives the order to Aaron. You can see Aaron carefully measuring out a single omer of manna and placing it into a golden pot. And then in verse 34, he places that pot before the testimony, right inside their most sacred space, to be kept forever as physical proof of God's faithfulness.
And how long did this whole thing last? Verse 35 gives us the absolutely staggering answer. 40 years. Just imagine a time lapse. Seasons change, leaders grow old, an entire generation is born and grows up. And every single day, they're all eating this same miraculous bread from heaven, right up until the moment they reach the border of the Promised Land. Finally, verse 36 just gives us a small but helpful little clarification. It tells us that an omer is 1/10 of a larger measure called an ephah. It's just a little piece of context to ground the story in its time and place. And so, this ancient story of survival and trust leaves us with a question that's just as relevant today as it was back then. It's a story about physical hunger in the desert, sure, but it really challenges us in every area of our lives where we're tempted to hoard, to worry, and to disobey. It makes us ask, what does it truly mean to trust for our daily bread when we can't see, and maybe aren't supposed to see, tomorrow's supply?